Shirley MacDonald was a practical woman who was nearing 60. She lived in part of a small grace and favour cottage in the Home Park at Windsor. This was a flat she occupied for free by the grace and favour of the Queen, so long as she was employed in the royal household. She would be turned out when she retired. Windsor suited her, really, and she thought that when she did retire, she might try to buy a large enough house so she could do bed and breakfast for day visitors who didn't feel like going back into London after a day of seeing the parts of the castle that were open to tourists. She also had a room she could use overnight in Buckingham Palace when she needed it for work. She hadn't enough money saved to buy a place in London, and she'd miss that, as she loved everything about London, but she was philosophical and resigned to spending her retirement somewhere not too far removed from the castle walls. Shirley was the most senior of the Queen's dressers. She was a lady's maid who served, technically, under the Mistress of the Robes. An aristocratic woman who had that title turned up only for ceremonial occasions. She was, in Shirley's view, useless. Shirley had no time for this particular palace archaism, but she'd learned to put up with it. Shirley herself had plenty of work to do. She drew the Queen's bath in the morning, and sometimes in the evening too. She cared for the whole of the Queen's wardrobe, from the heavy mantle she wore for the Garter service in June to the country clothes she wore on weekends. She cleaned, catalogued and repaired everything the Queen wore. On a daily basis she laid out her shoes and underthings, her dresses, jackets and jewels. Usually the Queen emerged from the bath in her dressing gown about 8:30. Shirley would appear from behind a screen. "Good morning, Your Majesty." "Good morning, Shirley." Not unfriendly, a little perfunctory. Then they'd have a little conversation about the weather, and Shirley would give as an excuse the growing coolness of the autumn for a heavier wool skirt she'd laid out. The Queen seldom wanted something different from what Shirley had chosen for her to wear. Whatever she wore, the Queen regarded as not unlike a uniform. She put on pearl earrings in the same spirit that a policeman did up his silver buttons. They were part of the job. They indicated who she was. They were not pretty things for her ears. They were her name badge. "I'm Mrs. Queen." Shirley respected the Queen, but she was not in awe of her. Shirley's grandmother had been a laundress at Balmoral, and she remembered her forever mending the edges of frayed sheets, even on weekends, even at home. Shirley's mother had come south to work in the kitchen for the royal family. Shirley had seen the insides and outsides of all the royal residences since she was a girl, and that was precisely why she'd been offered a job close to the Queen. She was familiar. She wouldn't bolt. She wouldn't sell her story to the Daily Mirror. If the Queen took no particular joy in her clothes, Shirley did. She adored the weights placed in the hems of her skirts so they'd hang properly and protect her from embarrassment on a windy day. She loved the lining of the coats, usually chosen in a contrasting but complementary colour. A plum-coloured jacket made of raw silk had a green apple lining that no one ever saw but the dressmaker, who was proud of her craft, the Queen, who seldom noticed, and Shirley, who liked to hold the jacket's tart interior up to the light. Shirley was friendly with one of the senior butlers, William de Morgan, who would sometimes stop by her room as she was at the ironing board steaming out a few creases. His method was to come in her ironing room, smiling ear to ear, surprised and happy to see her. Then he would point to something of interest outside the window. "That's a thundercloud, if I'm not mistaken." When she turned to look, he whipped the purple jacket off the ironing board, and before she could even turn around to protest, he'd put it on and stood proudly before the mirror, imitating some of the Queen's well-worn sayings. "Have you come far today?" "Good morning, Shirley." "That will be all, William." "Give it here, William," Shirley said, noticing how much more proudly William wore it than the Queen did. It made him taller, more erect. He glowed in it.